Rome didn't grow only because it was powerful. In fact, it also grew thanks to debt. When we think about Rome today, disciplined legions, huge wars, and conquests usually come to mind. But there was something else most people never think about: the cost of it all. Because war was not cheap. Thousands of soldiers needed food so they wouldn't go hungry. Weapons were needed, roads were needed, salaries were needed. There was the care of horses, weapons, and supplies. In short, there was a massive system running, and that system constantly consumed money. So how did Rome handle this situation? At first, things were simpler. In the early days of Rome, soldiers were ordinary citizens. If you owned land, you could be called into the army, and when the war ended, you would return home. But as Rome grew, things changed. Wars became longer. People were no longer going to war for just a month or two, but for years. That's why the professional army system emerged. The state began paying soldiers salaries. And then Rome realized something very important. War was actually making money. What happened when they conquered a new land? New taxes, new resources, new gold, new slaves. In other words, war was paying for more war. But this is where the dangerous part began. Over time, Rome stopped relying only on taxes. It started borrowing money. Especially during major wars, it collected huge amounts of money from the wealthy. Of course, nobody gave that money out of kindness. They wanted interest in return. They wanted the right to collect taxes. They wanted trade privileges in newly conquered regions. So war was no longer just political. It had become an economic opportunity. After a while, the entire system became dependent on it. Generals wanted more wars because victory brought power. The rich wanted wars because wars made money. The state wanted wars because the economy depended on them. And without realizing it, Rome's entire system became addicted to expansion. The problem is, no empire can grow forever. At some point, there are fewer lands left to conquer. Revenue falls, but expenses stay the same. And that's when states usually do the same thing. They reduce the value of money. That's exactly what happened in Rome. At first, Roman coins were made of silver, but over time the amount of precious metal inside them was reduced. People were still using the same coins, but those coins were no longer worth what they used to be. The result? Inflation. Prices went up. Trust declined. Ordinary people started struggling. But the rich usually survived anyway because they had land, property, and connections. The real burden fell on ordinary people. And when you look at today, it's hard not to notice some similarities. Government debt, constant money printing, huge wars financed through borrowing, people crushed under inflation. Of course, we're not literally Rome today. The world is very different, but sometimes the logic feels disturbingly similar. Maybe Rome's biggest lesson is this: if a system constantly needs to grow, eventually it gets exhausted. And when the system gets trapped, ordinary people usually pay the price. That's why history matters. Because history is not just the past. It's almost like repeated human behavior. So the next time you hear about a new crisis, war, or economic decision, don't just watch the news. Ask yourself, who profits from this? Who provides the money? And in the end, who pays the price? Because most of the time, the real story starts exactly there.